Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the closing session of this conference. This closing session will have several speakers for you lining up to close this conference. We start actually from inward to outward. We start here in Amsterdam and we'll move outwards to the US and to UK with our fellow organizers. So first of all, Philip Patberg and myself will just sort of summarize the conference in 5 to 10 minutes, try to give you an overview of the themes discussed. Then Philip K. will talk about the emerging scholars after that. And finally, David from UK will address us the closing conference and the final closing conference of the conference. Okay, so we get started. Yes, about the conference, it was a magnificent conference, a big conference. It started with our keynote speakers, Marjan Minnesma, who said our country is in a crisis. And she took the Dutch government to court 2 times. It was more the activist role she played. And she gives us a very powerful talk also showing what we can do, actually, what people can employ also to make a transition. Next two were also taken by Christian Felber, about the nature protection rights, the common good balance sheet, the economy for the common good, and actually downplaying the GDP symbol. And actually said evolution should be maybe required to transition, but the revolution should be in our mindset. That was also the quote by Diederik Samson, was our 3rd keynote speaker. And he took a more positive mood onto the future, but on a European perspective, where he said that the European Green Deal could push growth into another direction. And he made also a comparison between the 2008 crisis and the 2020 crisis. And we need a recovery strategy and building blocks. Okay, so the top 4 keynotes gave a nice wide sphere to place the conference. The big themes in our conference were ecological realities, economic, social and cultural context, and participating process and education, assessment and policy. And it was really an enormous amount of different disciplines combining together. I must admit, this is increasingly wide. The whole spectrum, in fact, from arts to science to humanities to social sciences, is actually present within the conference. And maybe a few things to mark up is that, for example, to place it also the questions we put ourselves. How do ecological realities frame our planetary existence? There was a nice paper also about green is the new clam from Monaco, which has also a nice research also showing that green infrastructure in a city really can improve also sustainability and sustainable feeling. It was a countryside. Monaco is a small land, but it has a sign. The EGD, of course, was mentioned by our keynote speaker, Diederik Samson. But I was also pleased to learn that in South Korea, Reazu Ashan et al. Claimed that South Korea has adopted a Green New Deal policy as a response to the to uplift the economy in a post-pandemic approach. So we see also that besides European governments, also national governments take this New Deal policy, which is good. Whose sustainable future it is? Well, I think it's for low income versus high income. It's north versus south. It is including colonial history. It's we have also sustainable future for ecofeminisms, the indigenous population, and of course, for sure, the younger generation. Some pressing demands on our time. These are, of course, manifold, as we've seen also in money contributions, the energy transition, the food transition, social justice on equal rights, healthcare and education, clean solutions for energy and transport, and of course, recovery of nature and biodiversity, to name a few. So we have a lot of these covered also in our things. Okay, maybe to put in also, maybe as a last remark, we don't have the luxury, in fact, to say, who to frame responsibility to all. We don't have the luxury to say it should just say that we all have to put all hands on deck. So it's the citizen assemblies, it's the corporations and cooperative structures, it's the stakeholder meeting groups, it is also the various scales of government, local, regional, national, supranational and global, and of course the citizens who can elect. Okay, maybe to get a bridge to Philip, because we'll talk about a special theme about accelerating the transition. So that yesterday we had a session on achieving the transition towards a sustainable country here in the Netherlands. What do we need from politicians? And it was a session well visited, and we had an enormous amount of key speakers, keynote speakers and experts talking about innovation and about circular business models towards systemic change in our country, with some practical recommendations also for the government. So that was our session yesterday. So that's already something to accelerate the transition, Philip. Your theme.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for these words of summary. And dear participants, it is already time to say goodbye, which is a bit weird because in some places, maybe you're watching from, it's really early in the morning. This is one of the perks of doing this virtually. So the 17th International Conference on Environmental, Cultural, Economic and Social Sustainability is almost over. It will come to an end, but it is hopefully not the end of these conversations. I'm very happy to say that we have discussed how we can keep the content alive and enable more discussions going forward into the future, keeping the presentations and the electronic media that have been uploaded available for a while so that we can actually make the most out of this situation. I think this is really very much appreciated. Thank you also again for the great collaboration with our friends from Common Grounds. And let me also extend the thanks to the people in this room, the technical crew who has actually made this possible. Thank you very much. Let me very briefly reflect on the special theme. Indeed, this conference had a special theme about how we can accelerate into a more sustainable future. And I thought about just the lessons that I learned. So these are my lessons. Hopefully they will inspire you a bit or raise further questions. So first, I think it is very important to strike a balance in our research and also in our activism, in our outreach and impact activities, between focusing on the positive signals that are there, and as Stuart already mentioned, a Green Deal that is even emulated in other parts of the world as an example. There are very successful transitions underway, and I think we should focus on those. Maya Minnesma has very, I think, eloquently spoken about a lot of her track record in bringing solar energy to rooftops in the Netherlands, suing the government, and making transportation electric. And this is just one person, one organization. It's phenomenal to see that happening. So let us focus on the positive examples that are out there. On the other hand, we need to balance that positive story with a story of urgency. There are less than 7 years counting down until we will have depleted the available carbon budget for a 1.5-degree future, which means we have to act quickly and decisively, and we have to have deep transitions. And the problem is obviously that there are obstacles in the way. We have discussed some of those obstacles during this conference. So the second lesson I learned is that there is really an elephant in the room, and that is the question of politics and power. I have learned, for example, about the important links between individual transitions in the energy field and in the food field or in the transportation field, and the deeper questions that we all should be busy with. For example, the question of how we organize our economy and how we measure progress. Is GDP, as Stuart has mentioned, actually a good way to measure things? It is what we actually measure that gets done. So this is, I think, one of the lessons learned. There are these deeper questions that we should engage with. I had fascinating debates with colleagues about why actually corporations have legal personality while the earth doesn't. These are some of the things we should take into the future and discuss critically. I also learned about the importance of tipping points, and that actually the social system is unpredictable, it is complex, and there are tipping dynamics on the way, which could bring us very quickly into a desirable future, but they also could bring us into an undesirable future. We were speaking during this conference and the keynote of Ilona Otto this morning. We were speaking about very important of those tipping elements, subsystems that we need to transform. For example, education, norms and values, the way we use information and communication, just to name a few. And I'm very happy to say that throughout all the panels I've seen, all the papers, there's a lot of empirical evidence, a lot of good case studies that actually show that we are already in those transitions and that the system is starting to move. Maybe the time horizon is 20, 30 years, but as we have said, some of these transitions can happen overnight very quickly. I've seen presenters talk about the role of children books in actually children's education. I've seen people talk about the role of photography in bringing about change. I have seen presentations about the important questions of labeling and CSR, and about questions about norms and values related to non-human life. The question, for example, whether vegetarians are more happy. And being a vegetarian, I can tell you that's absolutely the case, actually. Now, finally, I also learned that we have to accelerate ourselves. We have to accelerate the academic system in the universities. And I think this conference has been really an eye-opener to me. Many of us a year ago, 2 years ago, would have thought that, well, actually the whole thing about a conference is to travel to cool places and be somewhere where you're normally not, and you meet people and it's really fun and it will help you. And I think that's still the case, but this conference has shown us that we can also do it differently. There are alternatives. I think this conference has proven that we can maximize the space for participation. We can actually allow people from different time zones, from different areas to participate meaningfully and without the pressure of time. And I think we can even do that in the future. We can extend the content and make it very public. I think this is really something we need to learn. This is something that we can do as academia to move ahead into the future. And so finally, one thing that I learned is also, it is sometimes difficult to have discussions with other disciplines. You don't really understand all the concept. It takes time and effort, but once you actually engage with other perspectives, it is really rewarding. These last days for me have been such an experience, overcoming disciplines and overcoming boundaries. This has been a tremendous experience, and it has been a tremendous experience thanks to all of you who have been part of this conference. So on behalf of the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute and the FU, thank you so much for being here. Now, I hand over to Philip Kay, who will talk about emerging scholars. Philip, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philip. It's a rare case that there are two Philips. It's the most uncommon name I find. Yes, look, I just want to begin by saying some thank yous as well. I want to begin by thanking our hosts from the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute. Philip and Fjord have not only done so much to conceptually work out what we do with this, online event and the tools that we use, but importantly for the kinds of work and research that they do, which is has a deep conceptual or a broad conceptual footing, but directed towards deep social impact. So we had the great honor this year of partnering with you, and we look forward to being the advocates of the work that you do for years to come. I'd also like to thank our Research Network Chair, David Humphries. Again, he does a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes, conceptually guiding where we go, not just for 1 year, but over years, for us to have a clear and consistent and impactful plan for what we do with this research network. So that is critically important. The two probably most important people behind the scenes that keep the digital gears rolling have been Thames and Sephora. They are, again, not seen on screen, but they have done a really tremendous job connecting the live sessions, going through the asynchronous content and making sure all of these pieces work well for a seamless experience for us all. It's been a strange year for emerging scholars. The Emerging Scholar Program is something that we are very proud of. It's a competitive application, and it gives us a chance to put at the front of the room when we are in rooms, emerging scholars and give them a chance to not only present their work, but be in the thick of conversation. Unfortunately, this year we couldn't do it in person, but again, all of the intro videos about who they are, you'll find in the event schedule, and please engage with them and connect with them. And we hope to see them in person or online when we all meet in Granada next year. The other thing, the other big group that I want to thank is all of you. Now, there are a group of you who are in this room right now, and I want to thank you the most. Even in-person events, those who go to closing sessions need a extra, bonus points. I will tell your department head, whoever it is, that you have stuck it to the end. So this is a common thread. But because we have this platform where we can share content, this will get a much wider audience. So I want to thank you for all participating and embracing the tools and platform that we have provided for you. Nearly everybody uploaded digital content, which is fantastic. And that is a resource that's not just for the conference that we've had, it's going to be accessible to you for forever. So that is one of the things that the conference is not just a temporal thing that ends in a few days, but this is a resource that you'll get access to forever. Sorry, that's a big word. But the other thing that's important is I want to thank you for all the research that you do and the work that you do and how impactful it is in communities of all scales. So that's a really wonderful thing. There are a few ways that we can stay connected going forward, but I'm going to leave them to Dave to speak about. But I just really, we've spent a tremendous amount of work over this last year collectively thinking about how to build and support a platform that brings us together through the long of, without thinking just of a short-term fix for this year, but building a Brazilian infrastructure that can transform what the scholarly conference can be or is. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for participating in this conference, and I look forward to seeing you as this journey continues. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Well, it's always slightly sad to close the annual sustainability conference, but here goes. Firstly, thanks, Philip, for acknowledging and thanking our emerging scholars. Inclusiveness is part of what we stand for, and the Emerging Scholar Programme of Common Ground enables early career professionals to attend a major international conference, share panel sessions, network, present their own paper. It's been slightly different this year, of course. Now, we first discussed the possibility of holding the conference in partnership with the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute when Philip Patberg and I met in Amsterdam in June 2019. And the organising committee met for the first time online shortly afterwards. And we agreed the conference theme, accelerating the transition to sustainability, policy solutions for the climate emergency, through a shared concern that time is fast running out and we need to focus our attention on how to move faster. And I had the honour of announcing the venue and theme for this conference, last year's sustainability conference held in Santiago, Chile. And I'm delighted to see that some of the Chilean colleagues we met last year are here this year. Thank you for returning to the sustainability conference. But then after Santiago, everything changed with COVID-19. And for much of last year, we planned two scenarios, an in-place conference and an online one. Then last autumn, with the second wave of the pandemic, it became clear we could not go ahead in place as we normally would. And it's wonderful to have this opportunity to thank our colleagues in Amsterdam, not only for being flexible in response to the pandemic, but for actually embracing the challenge, for treating the problems thrown up by the pandemic as an opportunity to be seized and converted into something new and exciting. So Philip, Stuart, Zipporah, Nicolene, thank you so much. You made it happen. Your energy and commitment in working through difficulties and in creating the studio set that you've worked with through this week has been an inspiration. And although Philip is the only Amsterdam colleague I've had the pleasure of meeting in person, we've all got to know one another in online organising committee meetings this last year. And we're now all trusted old colleagues and friends. Thank you again. And we will meet for that beer one day. Thanks also to Bill, Philip and Tamsin at Common Ground in Illinois, United States. Common Ground are leaders in online pedagogy and developing knowledge ecologies that cross disciplinary and national boundaries and which unite scholars with policy practitioners, politicians, activists and business leaders. Common Ground was already developing a blended conference platform, but the pandemic catalysed this work in progress, and the impressive CG Scholar platform, which we've been working with this week, is the result. And it's been good to see this platform being used so effectively. The commenting culture of this conference has been very positive, with colleagues engaging constructively with the work of their peers, which is wonderful to see. And we will use the blended model for all future sustainability conferences. All participants will now have the option of attending in place or remotely. And just to remind you that Common Ground does not just organise conferences. There is a family of journals associated with this conference that is part of the Sustainability Research Network community. There's the International Journal of Environmental Sustainability, the International Journal of Sustainability in an Economic, Cultural and Social Context, and the International Journal of Sustainability Policy and Practice. Please consider submitting your conference paper for one of these journals. Your paper will be peer reviewed by 2 colleagues, and in exchange, you'll be asked to peer review 2 other submissions. So we hope to receive your submitted papers. Thank you. And we also publish books. So if you have a book proposal, we would like to hear about it. And the lessons learned from this year's online event will help in our planning for the blended 2022 conference in Spain, where we will have the honour of working with Professor José Gutiérrez and colleagues from the Faculty of Education at the University of Granada as our partner institution for next year. We've chosen as our conference theme, post-pandemic sustainability towards a green economic recovery for nature, people and planet. And this theme will enable us to continue the good work we've done this year on accelerating the transition to sustainability. While the pandemic has resulted in a decline in carbon emissions and a lighter human ecological footprint on the planet, this has not been enough to slow anthropogenic climate change. And as we've seen throughout this week, we now have only a narrow and rapidly closing window for governments to introduce economic stimulus packages and the more humane governance models necessary to promote a durable post-pandemic green economic recovery. It would be a wasted opportunity if our political leaders were to seek to return to the status quo ante, the situation before the pandemic. And many of the ideas we've considered this week will feed into next year's conference. In terms of geopolitics, the prospects for a green recovery are actually quite positive. We heard from Derek Sampson this week, one of our plenary speakers, on the excellent work being carried out in the European Union for a Green Deal. And with the election of Joe Biden in the United States, the stars are now lining up for an infrastructural shift from what we really should see as the old carbon economy, structured around fossil fuels, to the new zero carbon economy based on renewables. And we heard from other inspiring plenary speakers this week on how this can happen. It was heartening to hear from Maya Minesma of the work of Agenda, including in legally challenging the government of the Netherlands and insisting it would be in violation of human rights legislation if it did not curtail carbon emissions. From Christian Felber, we learned of how we can work towards an economy governed not by narrow self-interest, but by common well-being and the shared collective good. And we heard today from Ilona Otto on 6 social tipping elements that can be triggered to decarbonise the Earth system in order to achieve carbon neutrality. Just one quick reminder before we close. Although this is the formal end of the conference, the second talking circle, Time to Fit with the time zones for participants joining us from the Americas, will take place later today at 1500 US Central Standard Time, and that's 2200 Central European Time. All are welcome, so please come along. If you're feeling slightly unhappy that already this year's conference is over, you'll be very welcome at this talking circle, which provides us all with a chance to reflect on what are our take-home messages, what conversations have we started that we want to continue, and how are we going to progress them and take them forward, and how might we be thinking differently about sustainability as a result of the conversations we've had over the last 3 days. For next year's conference, we're already seeking paper proposals and proposals for colloquiums, roundtables, and focused discussions. The website is open for your proposals. We will be having plenary speakers both in place and online. This is the new blended conference model that we're now working with. And we'll have presentations, including from plenary speakers in both English and Spanish. Finally, there's one more group of people I must thank. Thank you to all the participants at this conference, to you, for being part of the gathering, for caring about sustainability, and for generously sharing your research and expertise. Thank you. We hope to welcome you to Granada, Spain next year. Until then, please continue to stay healthy and safe. Thank you very much for your contributions to this year's sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you so much. Thanks. I thank the organizing committee as well and Common Ground Research Network. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.